Good day everyone, welcome to GE6 Art Appreciation class. I hope everyone is done na with the midterm examination and or midterm requirements in your different subjects. As for the subject, hindi na tayo nagbigay ng midterm exam kasi you had your short film naman na. However, we are going to have your final exam pa. So, make sure na ina-access natin yung mga learning resources sa Google Classroom kasi dun din naman ako kukuha ng mga assessment questions sa final exam natin. I wasn't able to meet some of my classes last meeting, so uulitin lang natin din dito yung ilan sa aking mga paalala at announcements and also doon sa mga para sa mga absent din last synchronous class. Malapit na tayong matapos sa mga lectures natin ngayong semester for GE6 Art Appreciation. Sa katunayan, we are down to our last 4 topics. So, ngayong week, March 21 to 25, we will be discussing Art of Emerging Europe. Next week, March 28 to April 1, we will explore the topic Modern and Contemporary Art. April 4 to 8, so making appropriation and improvisation. Tapos, we will have siguro some sort of academic break kasi Holy Week. Ang start ata niyan ay April 10 to 16 if I am not mistaken. So, after Holy Week, that is April 18 to 22, we will proceed in our last topic, which is Art in Asia. So, probably April 22, tapos na tayo sa ating mga lectures. So, maybe we can have our final exam in advance para wag na tayong sumabay sa exam week para bawas na din ang inyong e-examan at bawas na ang inyong iisipin pagdating ng exam week. So, sana okay lang din sa inyo na mag-advance exam tayo sa Art Up if ever maaga tayo matapos sa lectures natin. Anyways, we'll talk more about this kapag nasa last topic na tayo na ng ating discussion. I-schedule natin yan. Mag-agree tayo sa date ng inyong final exam for this subject. Okay, so again, be mindful of the dates or the timeline that I have mentioned. Be responsible. Be a responsible student. Make sure na makaka-attend kayo sa klase natin. Pumasok on time during synchronous class, please. I-access yung mga learning resources na ibinibigay ko para wala din tayong ma-miss out. Again, ilang topics na lamang po ang i-discuss natin. So, please guys, be responsible and do your task. Last video lecture natin, we have discussed the first topic in Unit 2, Art in Early Civilization. There, we have discussed that during the prehistoric art, it is evidently shown that the pieces that these ancient people produce are more of cave drawings and paintings of animals that they used to hunt for food and for shelters as well, enable for them to survive. Handprints are also seen in their environment and places that they used to live in. It was also mentioned that these artworks during prehistoric period are very exquisite, meaning they are extremely beautiful. And during our discussion, we have mentioned there that those artworks, the techniques that the Asian people have used are pretty advanced. They were able to maximize their resources even though they have limited resources during those times, during those era. However, during prehistoric art, some artworks that are presented or produced, we cannot conclude clearly kung bakit nila ginawa yun. What is the purpose ng mga pieces nila. They use it for some purpose that we don't know. On the other hand, it gives us a glimpse on how they live their life during those era. Next, also we have discussed there, dun sa ating past video lecture, the art in Egypt. So, majority of their art was created for the afterlife. They built temples, great shrines to commemorate or honor of whatever or whoever we go after life. So this is what constitutes Egyptian art that we can study or reflect on today. Their art, it's very fascinating and a very interesting style of creating art, very regimented because It followed definite conventions and how they decided the human form and look more into that. So basically, that sum up our discussion in art in early civilization. So I hope that you have gained something from the last topic. And later, bago tayo yeah. So, during synchronous class natin, papakinggan din natin yung mga reactions or, yeah, kung napanood nyo na tong video na to bago pa natin bago pa mag-present ang ating mga reactors sa klase for the topic of art in early civilization. Okay, so now we move forward on the second topic under Western art history, art of emerging Europe. Okay. And to give you a bird's eye of what we will be dealing under this topic, here are the learning objectives. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to first identify the major periods in Western history. Second, compare and contrast the artworks produced during the different time periods and art movements. And lastly, discuss the importance of art to the development of Western culture. Before we get down into business, it's important for us to remind ourselves on the importance of studying the history of art. As we have mentioned in our previous lessons, and sa pagsasimula pa lang ng klase natin during our first meeting, during this time, itong prehistoric, we have no idea on what's on the mind of these ancient people when it comes to their artworks. We have no idea on the reasons in making such art. We are unsure of what art means during this period because nothing was written. Our conjectures are all about guessing and interpreting the meaning of each artifacts or pieces of artworks that had been found by different archaeologists. However, art history plays a huge role in the conversation of history of the world. We study history so we can understand better human story, so that we can understand where we came from and who we are as a people. That is why, again, we discuss the history of art so that you can see what art history has to offer. So, and we will be starting our discussion with Greeks and Romans. Okay? So, Greeks and Romans all the way to the modern times, art has been used to communicate ideologies and belief systems prevalent within their context. Greek and Roman civilization were also known as classical world because both cultures aimed to embody the highest possible standard of quality in all aspects of their society. When it comes to both art and architecture, both civilization ended to promote the possibility of having an objective and widely accepted standards for beauty. The influence and impact of both classical worlds are far-reaching. Most art movements have taken inspiration from certain artistic elements from the two civilizations, and there are different art movements that emerge within the different time periods in Europe, and each movement has a distinctive characteristic to them, highlighting the different trends and changes as they transition from one period to the next. So we will be discussing a lot of art movements during the time periods in Europe. So Greeks are really important people in history, but also more specifically within art history. The reason for this is that the Greeks are blessed because they had time to think, they had time of peace and prosperity. They are lucky, and it opened a lot of opportunities, exploration, and new discoveries, opened up new doors to enter in different aspects and issues of the society. It is evidently shown that there are a lot of Greek big-minded people that has a lot of contributions on the different areas and aspects that we are using as of today until today. So the time period of art in ancient Greece is around 700 BCE all the way up to 33 CE. During this time period, art improves a lot, and the reason for this was Greek people has questions in their brain. They are always curious, they always ask questions, and the questions in this context is that how do we make a representation of the perfect human. So yan ang mga naiisip nitong mga ancient Greek people natin. Ito yung kanilang pinag-iisipan during those time. So basically, what they are looking for is perfection. Perfection in the appearance, like proportion, in the depictions of these people. That's what they wanted. And so with their knowledge and expertise on the different areas like mathematics, philosophy, music, and theater, they started to create sculptures that represented perfection. It took them a while to do it, but eventually, they nailed it. Napagtagumpayan nila. And the Greeks are notably passionate about natural phenomenon and believe that nature should be in perfect order. These principles, belief system, and ideologies are the core of Greek art and architecture. So there are different time periods, as I have mentioned a while ago, within the history of art in ancient Greece. And this are geometric period, archaic period, classical, and Hellenistic period. And we are going to mention some important events and some highlights of this period in the context of art. So let's start with the geometric period. So this is the time when Greece starting to get back from the onslaught of what seemed to be their dark ages. So during the dark ages of Greek history, many significant settlements were abandoned and the population continued to decline at a drastic rate. And to be specific, the population that we are referring to here is the Mycenaean population or civilization. Before Dark Ages, the Greek followed the Mycenaean economic and social structure, which is filled with a strict class hierarchy and rule. So it's not clear why the Mycenaean civilization collapsed, kung bakit nawala ang Mycenaean civilization. Actually, even historians and scholars are quite unsure on the reasons of the fall of Mycenaean civilization. But some says it could be the following reason. So first, pwede daw na natural disaster, pwedeng overpopulation, internal social and political unrest, invasion o pananakop from foreign tribes such as sea people, and regional climate change. So probably ito daw yung mga reason kung bakit nawala yung Mycenaean civilization at dito nagsimula yung dark ages ng Greek history. Also, the ruins of Mycenaean sites throughout mainland Greece shows evidences of intentional destruction, mainly by fire. So this support one of the reasons that we have mentioned a while ago, that the collapse of Mycenaean civilization might be due to the invasion of foreign tribes. Okay, so the Dark Ages lasted for about 300 years, and many people of Greece lived in a small communities that moved accordingly. The people lived a more pastoral lifestyle and based their lives around their livestock needs. During this time, the Greeks didn't leave behind any written records, and just like during the Stone Age period, and because of that, many historians believe them to be illiterate. Hindi sila marunong magsulat, hindi sila marunong magbasa. However, later on in the Dark Ages, the Greek appeared to have relearned how to write and adopted a new alphabet by Phoenicians. So this version of alphabet in the language formed the basis for the modern Greek language. Okay? So also, a geometric period is a period when geometric shapes and patterns have taken spotlight in most of the artworks. So during the proto-geometric period, painting on ceramics began to reemerge. These vessels were only decorated with abstract geometric shapes adopted from Mycenaean pottery. Ceramicists began using the fast wheel to create vessels which allowed for new monumental heights. In geometric period that followed, figures once more became present on the vessel. The period lasted from 900 to 700 BCE and marked the end of the Greek Dark Ages. A new Greek culture emerged during this time. The population grew, bumalik uh, paglaki ng population nila. Trade began once more and the Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet for writing. This culture was more focused on the people of polis, which is reflected in the art of this period. The period gets its name from the reliance on geometric shapes and pattern in its art. Ano po, yung mga drawing ng geometric shapes sa mga vase, and even their use in depicting both human and animal figures. Okay, so next period is the Archaic period. Okay, so the period placed importance in human figure. This was primarily a result of Greece trading activities with other civilization. So the Archaic period in Greek art saw a flourishing of sculpture and decorated pottery, particularly vases in the red and black styles. Near Eastern and Egyptian influences played prominently in the change in style from the previous geometric standards to a more naturalistic style that included animals, mythical beasts, and botanical elements. The artistic traditions of archaic Greek art movement set down during this period influenced the later classical period in Greek art, which we are going to discuss later. Naturalistic sculptures of the human figure were created in a large scale. Jewelry took on new refinement, and painting evolved with the introduction of new mediums. So during archaic period, there are a lot of art movements that occurred, from painting of geometric shapes, ano po, on the vases, different vases, to creating naturalistic sculptures and refinement of jewelry. Beginning in the 7th century BC, a divergence took place from which artisans took a turn away from the geometric designs of the past and began to focus more fully on the figures and elements of natural world. Next period is the classical period. Though it was mentioned in the previous slide that the experimentation in a realistic and a more naturalistic movement or style begun before the end of the archaic period, it was not until the classical period that 2 and 3 dimensional forms achieved proportions and postures that were naturalistic. So classical period is the peak of Greek sculpture and architecture. This is the time when the Greeks found themselves rebuilding their temples and focusing creating artworks. Classical period was a period of transition when some sculptural work displayed archaizing holdovers alongside the so-called severe style. So when we say severe style, the features can be described with realistic anatomy, serious expressions, pouty lips, and thick eyelids. For painters, the development of perspective and multiple ground lines enrich composition. Okay, so last period is the Hellenistic period. Uh, this is the time of Alexander the Great. So art was primarily focused on showcasing emotions and depicting reality. So uh, this was the time again of Alexander the Great, or we can say that this period followed the death of Alexander the Great, one of the most successful conquerors in the history. His empire stretched from Greece and Egypt to the Indus Valley and Afghanistan, and the Greeks, their influence stretched as far east as modern India. During this time, the concern of the artist in making art such as sculptures is not only about the perfections of proportions and appearance, but also this was the time where the artists were more interested in capturing emotion and emotion. And one of the example of this is the great altar of Zeus from Pergamon. Here we can see the expression of agony and a confused mass of limbs convey a newfound interest in drama. So the origins of theater and drama also can be traced during the Greek civilization. The followers of Dionysus, the god of fertility, started the Greek theater. People who were devoted to Dionysus would dance during ceremonies while giving their offerings to their god. Eventually, Genetians devised a more structured form of drama involving dances and choral songs, which depicted Greek mythologies. Eventually, the Greek organized theatrical contests where the performance were held in front of large crowd or citizens. Okay. In addition to this, added interest and focus of the artist during the Hellenistic period is the Laocoon and his sons. So Laocoon, a Trojan priest, and his sons being strangled by serpents. Their position was a result of Laocoon's because he felt that the wooden horse offered by the Greeks as a gift to Athena was a trick. And Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, was enlarged by such action, which led him to send serpents to strangle Laocoon and his sons. Okay. Also, just like the Greeks, the Romans valued their gods, and this was evident with their sculptures and artworks. So, architecturally, um, Hellenistic period, the scale of structures vastly increased, as can be seen with the Temple of Apollo at Didyma, the picture on the left side, and some complexes even terrace their surrounding landscape in order to create spectacular vistas, as can be seen at the sanctuary of Asclepios on Kos, the second picture. Upon the defeat of the battles and invasion affecting Greece, the Hellenistic period came to a close, with the Roman admiration and predilection of Greek art and culture. However, classical aesthetics and teachings continued to endure from antiquity to the modern era. So now, to ancient Greece, it is also important to discuss the history of ancient Rome. It can be said that Roman civilization came of age during the Hellenistic period. As mentioned earlier, it was a period when the Greek culture's influence has reached its peak in the Mediterranean world. The Romans were fond of Greeks and their achievement in arts. So the fusion of Greek and Roman cultures can be seen in most Roman artworks. Um, sa fondness ng mga Roman sa mga art pieces na pinuproduce ng Greeks, some people said or says that Romans only merely copied or kumopya lang sila sa Greek art. Kinopya nila yung style ng Greek art. And because of this, Romans eventually uh, made made them to produce artworks that are often looking stern, harsh, and strong. So they also invoke the principle of realism in most of their artworks, highlighting the features of human beings. They were also known as master builders. They created grand monuments and other infrastructures. And as you can see there in the infographics in your screen, one of their architectural achievement would have to be the Colosseum. One of its main uses was for entertainment purposes like public events and gladiator games. This structure was created manifestation of Roman builders, craftsmanship, which focused on logical organization of the entire edifice. Okay, so now we move to the Middle Ages, the period of Egyptian history between the 5th century and the 15th century. This is an era with an unfounded reputation, also called the Dark Ages or the medieval times. Most people associate this time with the brutal cruelty, devastating wars, and great plagues. On the other hand, although there were wars, plagues, and a fair share of cruelty during the Middle Ages, art and intellectual pursuits were not came to a halt. During this period, the church was the most important figure. The most important products of the early Middle Ages would have to be copied of the Christian scriptures. The printing press also came later after the Middle Ages. So copies of the scriptures were done by hand. These copies were also done with illustrations and decoration, which highlights the religious focus of the period. During this time, great cathedrals were also built. These cathedrals can be categorized into two periods, the Romanesque and the Romanesque inspired by the old Roman Empire, and Gothic, which had a more northern flavor from the Goths, vulgar and barbarian. During the Renaissance period, or the Renaissance period, artists valued the individual as a subject of art. So Renaissance literally means awakening or rebirth. And indeed, during this period, there was a rebirth on the perspective of different artists. As we have mentioned, the Middle Ages portrayed Gothic art. So the Gothic style of architecture is characterized by pointed arcs and ribbed vaults. This form of portrayal incorporated fine woodwork and stonework. The Gothic art used flying buttresses and ornamental gables. A good example of the medieval age is the Notre Dame Cathedral located in Paris. While here, during the Renaissance, artists followed the more classical form of art. They portrayed human beauty and the religion predominantly. The Renaissance artists had a deep sense of perspective and developed two-dimensional effects. Michelangelo's David is a good example rather of Renaissance art. And during the Renaissance period, there was also a revival of Roman theatrical plays. These plays were performed during special occasions at the courts of Italian princes. The plays were done in such a way that showcased grand and lavish entertainment for the audience. Aside from the song and dance numbers, they invested in elaborate stages and costumes of the actors, and eventually this would lead to Italy's opera, which have greatly influenced their tradition of popular theater. After Renaissance, there was a rebirth of another period in art history, Mannerism. Again, it was a period in art history which was a product of Renaissance period. And during Renaissance, artists would deserve nature and try their best to emulate it based on their observation. As the Renaissance ended, artists started directly copying subjects from existing works of art. Most artworks during this period displayed distorted figures, two-dimensional spaces, and discordant hues and colors and lack of defined focal points. In the different periods that we have discussed under art in emerging Europe, we can observe how art progresses in each era. There are a lot of improvement when it comes to the medium that they are using for the purpose, and it clearly shows what they are thinking upon making those pieces. May it be for a mere expression or about their political or social stand, or to commemorate and or for praising gods. But there's more. art does not improve and progress overnight, and there's a lot of art movement that happened before that influences the modern art, and we will also discuss each of this area as the last part of today's lesson. Okay, so yan yung mga sinasabi nating nangyari pa na art movement during the art in emerging Europe. So as you can see on your screen, we have there at least 10. Ano? So we have neoclassicism, romanticism, realism, sorry, impressionism, post-impressionism, neo-impressionism, art nouveau, fauvism, cubism, and futurism. So, isa-isahin natin yung mga highlights during this art movement. So, during neoclassicism, there seems to be a debate among historians as to the beginnings of modern art. There are accounts that would attribute for the emergence of this kind of art during the French Revolution in 1789. However, other historians claimed that it was the year 1863 when there was an emergence of modern painting exhibitions. Neoclassicism as a movement in Europe um, that transpired during the late 18th and early 19th century. It was the dominant art movement that time which basically aimed to revive and rekindle the influences of Greek and Romance into art and architecture. The ancient Greeks and Europeans had placed emphasis on human reason and keeping society in order. So these very principles were also the dominant principles during the Enlightenment period. Okay, so some historians would also say that this movement was a reaction to the artworks produced during the Baroque period. Um, so there was a call to veer away from such extravagance in terms of style and form of the Baroque period. Okay, next is the Romanticism. So Romanticism as an art movement um, used the central themes of neoclassicist artworks as a springboard, and Romanticists have highlighted heroic elements into their work. During the age of revolutions, there has been a tremendous focus on patriotic and nationalistic movements. One of the major revolution in history would be the French Revolution. Such revolutionary movement became the focal point of most romantic works. The major and central themes of Romanticism movement include the emphasis on the goodness of mankind. Most work also promoted justice, equality, and social order. Artists also emphasized during this time Romanticism or artists also emphasize emotions and feelings of man, which was a deviation from the humanist principles of rationalism. Okay. Next art movement is the realism. So realism focuses on the accuracy of details that depicts and somehow mirrors reality. There is a little room of imagination in this movement since emphasis is placed in observable traits that can um, concretize through artworks. Realism was heavily influenced by Hellenistic Greek culture since most artworks during this period placed emphasis on the human body. In a way, it revolutionized themes and techniques in paintings, and in addition, this movement also expanded and widened existing notions of what can be considered as a art. Since artists work within the context of revolutions and social change, artistic works began to depict real life events. And idealistic concepts and images were placed by real manifestations of society. There is a move to combine both art and life in artistic work since the modern world were um, suitable for subjects of art. This movement also re-examined existing belief system and traditions. So that comprises the art movement during the under realism. Okay, so next is Impressionism. The Impressionism movement started in France, which led to a break from the tradition in European painting. Impressionism is a style of painting that emerged in the mid to late 1800s. Impressionist artists incorporated scientific principles to achieve a more distinct representation of color. The distinctive characteristic of this style is that it allows the artist to emphasize the immediate impression he has of a particular event or a scene. The said impression is communicated by the artist through his work and can be seen through the brush strokes, distinctions of colors, and the lights and shadows used by the artist. Uh, Fifth is the Post-Impressionism. It is an art movement that emerged in France, which is a result of both the influence and the rejection of Impressionism. So most artists that belong to this movement started off as impressionists but later on saw the inherent limitations and flaws of impressionism. This eventually led to the development of individual style that gave emphasis to defining from with the use of broken colors and short brush stroke. Some of the famous post-impressionism artists include Paul Cézanne, Georges Seurat, Paul Gauguin, and Vincent van Gogh, among others. Most of the works of the said painters or artists became the framework of the contemporary techniques and trends during the 20th century. Okay. So now let's proceed sa last five na i-discuss nating art movement. So next is Neo-Impressionism. So as an art movement, Neo-Impressionism is considered as a response to empirical realism of Impressionism. So most painters who subscribe to such movement rely on systematic and scientific techniques that have a predetermined visual effects not only on the artwork itself but also how the audience perceive the art. Next is the Art Nouveau. So between 1890 and 1910, countries from Europe and the United States witnessed the emergence and flourishing of a new art style. This ornamental style of art was a break from the conservative historicism, which was the prevailing and dominant theme of most Western artworks. So this ornamental style uses long and organic lines that are concretely manifested in architecture, jewelry, and glass design, among others. In most works, the defining characteristic of Art Nouveau or Nouveau is the asymmetrical line that usually is in the form of insect wings or flower stalks. The line is done in such a graceful and elegant manner that somehow evokes a certain power to it. Next is Fauvism. This is a style of painting that emerged in France also around the turn of the 20th century. What makes Fauvists revolutionary is that they used pure and vibrant colors by applying straight from the paint tubes directly to the canvas. So this is done to produce a sense of explosion of colors in the canvas. And the Fauves, just like Impressionists, painted directly from nature. The difference between the two lies with how Fauves have this strong and expressive reaction to how they portray their subjects. Most Fauvist works reject conservative and traditional renderings of the three-dimensional space. What artists did was they introduced and promoted a picture space that is defined by the movement of colors. Okay, second to the last is Cubism. I know medyo familiar kayo dito sa movement na to. So, Cubism between 1907 to 1914, French artist Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque introduced a new visual art style called Cubism. So this style would later on have a huge influence on artists during the 20th century and even until now. Cubists highlighted the two-dimensional surface of the picture plane. Focusing on a flat surface was a rejection of the dominant techniques like the use of perspective, foreshortening, and modeling. In addition, one of the things that Cubism rejected was the existing and prevailing notion that art should imitate nature. Cubists emphasize that they are not in any way obliged to copy texture, form, color, and space. So, yung mga minention nating elements of art. So, they presented a new depiction of reality that may appear fragmented objects for the viewers or audiences. Last is Futurism. So, Futurism, it is in early 20th century art movement that started in Italy, which highlighted the speed, energy, dynamism, and power of machines. In addition, common themes for works in the movement are restlessness and the fast pace of modern life. Later on, the movement's influence branched out not only in Europe but also in Russia. The greatest impact of Futurism is evident in poetry and visual arts. Okay, so here are some samples of each art movement that we have discussed from different periods. And as you look into these images, I want you to analyze each picture and hopefully identify mentally where each of these artworks belong. Okay. So before we end, let's wrap up what we have discussed so far. So throughout the history, Europe has seen tremendous changes in its political landscape and social makeup, and witnessed transitions of different art movements in different time frames. The use of art as a medium of communication of different cultural events originated from the Greek and Roman civilizations. These two civilizations have greatly influenced the succeeding periods in art history. There were movements like Realism that highlights the primacy of individuality. Man being the focal point of most work is not new since the Greek and even during the Renaissance period, highlighted the centrality of man in any society. So the evolution of art in Europe helped them shape their culture, which was reflected in their society. So, if you have questions and concerns, you can find me at Kath Corto via Messenger or contact me via email at cmcorto@cspc.edu.ph. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.